Welcome to Making Memories. I'm Linda Wright at Randolph-Macon College, and today is March 26, 2024. Today I'm with Brian Turner, Professor of Political Science at Randolph-Macon since 1996. Welcome.
Thank you.
So to get things started, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon.
Okay, I received my PhD in 1992 from Tulane University. Previous to that, had been in the Peace Corps, which is kind of important for what I've ended up doing here at Randolph-Macon. In fact, I think it was important as part of my hiring. From 1992 to 1996, I was assistant professor at the University of Southern Mississippi. My wife was, who received a PhD in the same ceremony at Tulane with me, was at 1 year at the New College of Florida, and then was, in 1994, got a tenure-track position at Virginia Commonwealth. So we were apart for several years, and that's the main reason I was looking for positions in the Richmond area. And very, very, very pleased that Randolph-Macon was the one that ended up being the one that fit best for me and that I fit best for that particular position. In 1996, in the winter of 96, the only position I applied for was the one here at Randolph-Macon, and since I was coming to Richmond to be with my wife, we took an opportunity to arrange with the chair of the committee, Bruce Unger, the search committee, to just come and talk about the position. Basically, I came to campaign for the position, and something that I don't think we permit anymore because of the bias it introduces and the like, but I was all into the bias because Bruce was also a Tulane University PhD. And so we came, it was pouring rain, it was a cold winter day, February day, and I come in and talk with Bruce, and we're talking, and we go on, and we talk for about an hour, and I thought, wow, this is going wonderfully well. And then, of course, after I got the job and got to know Bruce, know that he would have talked with anybody for an hour who was a willing listener and to whom he could talk about his New Orleans food experiences. So awesome. That was a very nice start of making connection here with the faculty in the political science department. The position was created, as far as I understand, to serve the brand new international studies and international relations majors. So for some years, I don't know if this is still somewhere in my file in the provost's office, but for some years my sort of official title was Professor of International Studies, because the creditor, SACS, requires that you have some faculty designated as having that expertise if you have a major or related majors in this case in the program. And my undergraduate and my master's degree were in international studies. So the search committee included Bruce Unger and the other members of the political science department, but also Awisha Hilliard and in French, and George Lowry in business. And so basically, as I've kind of reflected on it, I needed to somehow bridge I won't say gap, but the different interests of Bruce Unger, who was very much an international relations and very much a political scientist person, and Awisha, who was a professor of French and a professor of humanities, and with whom I was going to take up teaching the theory and method of culture course. I had, with my wife at the time, Christina, had published a article on, it was an ethnohistory exploration of an aspect of Potawatomi history that required trilingual research. And I think Awisha was impressed at that and had enough confidence in me, I hope, and I hope it's been well served, to take up the teaching of that International Studies Introductory Course, Theory and Method in the Study of Culture, which is not a political science course. And then on the other side, the political scientists found that I was, hopefully, I guess they found that I had enough appropriate training in the discipline to appropriately serve the political science discipline. So that's, you never really know how your own search went, but my sort of understanding is that the position happened to describe something that I could offer to fill very nicely, and it was, of course, very, very convenient to be able to move to Richmond and sort of resolve that thing that when you first start out, you don't know, is it going to be 4 years and not that too bad, not too inconvenient, or is it going to be years of someone having to make a sacrifice? Ultimately, we both were able to get tenure track positions in the region.
That's wonderful. And so the international studies, international relations curriculum was very interdisciplinary at that, I guess, always.
Yes.
So trilingual, it was Spanish, I presume?
Yes, there was research depending on Spanish and Guarani.
Okay.
Guarani is the indigenous language of Paraguay that now is universally spoken by Paraguayans.
Oh, okay. And so you learned that at your time in the Peace Corps?
Correct.
Yes. Okay, that's awesome. So you were straddling, as you said, two different aspects of the curriculum, but I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the development of the political science department. So you mentioned Bruce Ungar, and he was definitely a political scientist, or international relations, I guess, was his field. The other two members of the department at that time
Or Howard Davis and Earl Coons.
Right.
And so they had been a 3-member department. When Howard Davis was dean for some period in the 1970s, I believe, there had been other political scientists who were, I guess, visitors or not tenure track. Before me being hired in 1996, the last tenure track hire was of Bruce Unger in 1968.
Wow.
So Bruce was the junior member of the faculty of the department for 28 years, just as it turns out. So I came in as the new junior member, and of course we had turnover rather quickly,
Yes.
Given the age distribution of the faculty at that time. And so we hired, I was hired in 96, so Tom Beatty was hired in 1998 to replace Earl Coons, who had retired. Lauren Bell hired in 1999 to replace Howard Davis, who was retiring. And then, of course, Bruce had been set to retire in 2009, and we hired Rich Maher at that time.
So it was a very stable department, and then a rapid turnover and a reconfiguration of the department.
When we interviewed Lauren Bell at a conference in 1999, it was Bruce and I, and Lauren, true to who she is, who we now know she is, asked about opportunities for advancement. And I was in my 3rd year at Randolph-Macon. I was already department chair because Bruce was serving as interim dean. And I said, you go straight to the top.
That's right. 3rd year, I'm department chair.
There's nobody in the way here.
Right. Well.
And she's certainly lived that as well.
Right. That's very good. So you were chair of the department quickly. Because
I was 1 year, and then Bruce came back. I was acting chair, and then in 2001 I became which would have been my 5th year.
Right.
I was department chair until just last year now.
Right. So, well, let's see. Do you want to mention any specific courses in the context of teaching in both of those departments? You mentioned the one, the International Studies introductory type courses.
Yeah, that's a really special course. When Awisha Hilliard was first showing me the materials, and she kind of handed them for me to look through, it was kind of like she didn't quite want to let go, and I understand why, because she had developed this course. It was a very unique course, and I'm just really feel very fortunate that she trusted me to teach. I would teach it one semester and she'd teach it the other. Ultimately, we made it just a once-a-year course that I mostly taught. And then, of course, after she retired, I'm the only one who's been teaching it. It's been a lot of fun teaching it. It's really to get students to think about what skills they need to understand people across cultural differences. And so it's not Cultures of the World class. It's not actually teaching ethnography, although we do a lot of that. And my background, having been married to an anthropologist and done ethnographic research for my political science dissertation, I have credentialed myself as qualified to teach that. And it's just been a lot of fun.
Who teaches that now? Oh, I guess you're phasing out the.
Since when I announced that when I let Tom Beatty, who's director of the International Studies program, know that I was probably going to retire. I was thinking about it, and once I let him know that I was going to do that, there was simply no one to teach that. The structure, the group of people who had been most interested in international studies in the 1990s people had gone different ways, and the econ business department is teaching, it has grown so much that the demands upon it means that it doesn't really serve the international studies as much as it could previously. Dave Bratt was hired in the same year as me, 1996, to also support the international studies program. As you know, Dave Bratt has moved on to other things. So it just, I think Tom made the right call, although it was a little shocking to me when he said, well, we'll just suspend the program.
And let the students who are currently declared major to be able to grow, to move through it, but not have new.
And the number of students had declined as well as student interests have changed. The creation of the Asian Studies program as a major has probably attracted some of the students that would have been international studies, and that's fine.
Just a different focus than the entire, but then that's a growing program, as you say. Okay, well, in the context of all of that, did you want to talk about your travel courses to Mexico and Cuba? You went to some exciting places, took students.
Yeah, travel courses are an interesting opportunity. They're a lot of work, but it's also a good program. I'd originally done one when I was still at University of Southern Mississippi, so I'd already learned a little bit about how to do that. That was in Yucatan in Mexico. And so I eventually introduced that here. We did it a couple of times, once in Yucatan, once closer to Mexico City. After 2006, when the Mexican government launched its campaign against the drug cartels and violence took off, even though the places I went were, in Yucatan has always been very quiet, just getting students and parents comfortable with the idea of going to Mexico was getting more difficult. So I let it, I didn't offer the program for a while until 2016. I thought, well, let's try a Cuba program. And that was great because between the time I put it on the books to start recruiting, President Obama announced, went to Havana and announced the liberalization of some aspects of travel. It certainly wasn't full recognition or anything like that, but it made it a whole lot easier and created a lot of interest in travel to Cuba. Next time I did it, President Trump was in office and things had gotten more difficult and complicated. It's always been, going to Cuba has always been complicated, and it got more complicated.
But so eye-opening for our students.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I'm sure that was something that they would never forget.
Yeah, and I would sell it to them saying, it's the shortest trip you can possibly take to go someplace entirely different from what you've experienced in the United States.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, another teaching experience that you've done a lot with is the surf program. And did you want to talk about some, I know you had a special experience this past summer, but just in general, your work with surf students.
Yeah, I've not done a lot of surf. I mean, I know some faculty have a surf student almost every year. I've always been available if my plans permit and if students are interested. But there have been a number of years where I've not. But the last several years I've had some interesting opportunities, and this past year was particularly interesting to have a student who became very interested in a very sort of in-the-weeds kind of political science set of questions in the country that is my specialty of first study, which is Paraguay. And so we spent 6 weeks in Paraguay this past summer. That project, we're going to be presenting a paper together this in June at the Latin American Studies Association, which is the top area studies association in that discipline in Bogota, Colombia this June.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's, and that for a student to have that on her resume
Yes.
as having presented. She's already presented at the Mid-Atlantic Conference of Latin American Studies, which is a regional,
Yeah.
a very friendly, low intensity place. This will be doing in Spanish in a foreign country in front of a major professional association.
Wow.
So that's very exciting for her.
Yeah, well, she's a star. And for the record, Ella
Right, Ella
Swag-
Swagger.
Right. That's awesome. So her language skills must be very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, she's a star. Any other teaching specific things?
Of course, Randolph-Macon places value on your ability to cover a lot of different ground. And I've liked that a lot. I'm not sure I would be happy to have been spent now 32 years, 28 here at Randolph-Macon of teaching, if I was always teaching Latin American politics every semester, and always teaching sort of the same 4 courses. One year, when I was chair, and we had sort of a need for a course, and we'd been filling it with adjuncts here and there in Chinese politics, which is a course that Earl Kuntz developed. And I'd hired someone who at the last minute was unable to teach the course. I had taken a number of courses in graduate school on China, on the Chinese Revolution and Chinese politics. So I figured, well, I can teach this. Last time I looked, Mao was dead and the Communist Party was in power. Both things are still true, so I can teach this course. And I had a lot of fun going back into my materials from grad school and teaching that or pulling that together. And, given that we have a number of students in Asian studies, I always felt a bit of an imposter as far, because in Latin American politics class, I speak Spanish, I can manage, I have a great deal of knowledge, and whereas I don't speak Chinese, I know I mispronounce things. And I would tell students that what we're doing is we're modeling how someone who's well-trained in comparative politics, how do we go about learning about a new system? And try to convince them that this was worth sitting in the classroom with me, talking about a country that I don't know well. I've only been to China once, and that was years after I started teaching the course in Chinese politics. That we can model learning together as part of what we do, and kind of the skills that we bring to bear when we're asked to try to figure out a system that's less familiar to us.
Well, that's awesome. What a great experience. And especially, like you say, Randolph-Macon professors do have a heavy teaching load to start with, and it's a broad array of courses, because it all has to be covered at some point. So, yeah, well, very good. I do want to state for the record that in 2020, you won the prestigious Samuel Nelson Gray Distinguished Professor Award, and I want to highlight that.
Thank you.
So, mentoring students. So, outside the classroom with students, we talked about travel, which I'm sure had a lot of adventures you have taking students abroad. But I was thinking about mentoring students, and you mentioned the Peace Corps early in this conversation, and I think you have been a mentor for students who are interested in that.
It surprises me how few people there are around who have been in the Peace Corps, so they've been someone that people come to when they have expressed an interest or want to learn more about it.
Have we had many students who have
We've
expressed?
had a few. I wouldn't call it many.
Yeah, a few through the years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think, I'm just interested in the Peace Corps in general, that Peace Corps was more active when it was first begun?
Well, Peace Corps by the late 1960s had about 15,000 volunteers overseas. By the time I entered in 1984, it was about 7,000 or 8,000. And that number, so it's been cut in half, and that number's been more or less the same until the pandemic, and everybody was brought home, and now they're building back up to about 7 or 8. So the capacity to, the size of the program allows for about 7,000 to 8,000 people in the field each year. So that means you're putting about 3,000 or 4,000 new people each year into the field. So it's a pretty small program. And so the Peace Corps itself has not shrunk since my experience. I think interest has kind of not declined, but it has taken some different directions.
Right, sort of stable. Well, you've been very active at the college in other ways besides your teaching or work with students. You've had a lot of service for the college. And I'm going to let you talk about as much as you want, but I do want to say that you have served for faculty secretary for 23 years. You just mentioned before the interview. So you want to talk about that so the listener will know what a job that is.
The Provost Rosenthal asked me before the most recent faculty meeting about the appointment process for the faculty secretary. And I said, well, it's only happened twice in the last 52 years, so there's not a lot of I can tell you about it. And I wasn't there for the one 52 years ago.
Which was when James Scanlon became faculty secretary.
For 29 years he served. Now, of course, during sabbaticals and things like that, someone else fills in. But the role is to any organization has minutes kept, and the tradition that developed here before I got here was fairly extensive recording of actual debate, not just saying a debate was held and the faculty decided to do this. And that's actually been very helpful. I know that our creditor, Sachs, has wanted to look at minutes set sometimes when certain concerns have been raised. And because the way we keep minutes here, and this isn't my doing, it's sort of, and maybe I embellished a little bit on what James had developed, but mainly it's what James developed, that the creditor has said, okay, we're satisfied that the faculty really was involved in this in a full-blown legitimate discussion about the merits of this particular proposal, and they're satisfied. So it's been useful to have minutes kept the way we do that. It probably is about a 10-hour commitment every month for the time in the meeting, for writing the minutes, for fielding questions, for getting ready for the next meeting, for pulling the materials together and all that. It's probably it's about a day and a half's worth of work each month. As my expertise grew, or people's perception of my expertise grew, a lot of inquiries about parliamentary procedure and are also part of the job, which I've enjoyed. And since I'm going out the door, I can tell you that the trick to parliamentary procedure is acting like you know the rules when you know that most of the people in the room don't.
So say it with authority.
And hoping that Lauren Bell won't contradict me.
Say it with authority. Well, also the trick to taking minutes, your minutes are very, very detailed. And as I just wonder, okay, well, the trick to taking minutes, I'm interrupting myself. You have to know every faculty member in the room.
That's gotten harder in the years since we came back from Zoom.
Yes.
We have a lot of new faculty, and we interact less than we used to.
Yes, and so Provost Rosenthal is awesome because she always just without a moment's hesitation calls everyone by name, which helps you, I'm sure, when she calls on them by name and doesn't just say, oh, you in the blue shirt. Right. But when I'm in faculty meetings, I look around and there's so many people I don't know. I'm usually scribbling a note to who I'm next to. Who is that? Because I really don't know a lot of the faculty by name or face as well as I used to. And you're right. I think post-COVID, we don't have as many opportunities maybe of interacting. And but for one, you have to know everybody. And as I say, the provost helps. But just taking down the essence, many times verbatim, of what people say so quickly. I commend you because a lot of conversation happens very quickly in the meetings. Yep. And has there ever been any discussion of just recording the meetings? No, I just wonder because
I've I actually talk about that when I've been teaching theory and method of culture, about your ethnographic method. You're talking with people, you're trying to find the way that is least intrusive but also most effective in keeping some sort of tabs that you can then analyze later of what people have said. And first of all, recording can be problematic in an ethnographic setting. You have to get permission, and it may interfere with people's willingness to speak, or they may speak to the machine instead of just talking the way they normally do. And I talk about that as faculty secretary. People ask me, but that would mean that I have to sit through the faculty meeting twice and produce a transcription, which is not the goal.
It's not the same as minutes.
This isn't linguistics where we want to, we want to, I try to identify the crux of the argument and not the embellishments and the other things that people add when they're speaking. It's gotten somewhat harder when people prepare texts and then don't share the text. Most people do, but sometimes they forget. And if someone reading a text can go much more quickly than someone who's speaking ad lib. Because when you're speaking ad lib, you have to stop and think about what your next point is, and for which I'm very grateful for, particularly some of the faculty who speak ad lib a lot.
Right. And so hopefully some of them will just submit their
Most people
statement.
Partly the minutes have gotten even longer because I ask people, if you've prepared a text, please share that with me.
Right. Right. Well, I just commend you for
thank
capturing the essence. Well, first of all, the names, all of that, I'm just awed by. And as I say, Provost Rosenthal is awesome at that too. But just distilling the crux of the matter as you're taking the notes and then in complete sentences for us. I think that is a skill. That's just a note-taking skill, which I think, I wonder if our students even, they don't know how to take notes, many of them anymore.
And Rob Holyer recruited me to be the faculty secretary in 2000. My first day as faculty secretary was September 12, 2001.
Oh, wow.
So
That's a heavy day.
Easy to remember the date. And at the end of it, he asked me how it went, and I was doing my dissertation research ethnographically, a lot of time in the field with fairly humble people who were organizing themselves in various ways. He asked me how it went, and I said, well, it was all in English. Unlike in my research, where it was in several foreign languages, and
so this is a piece of cake.
This was, but I really do think I developed some of that skill in just learning how to do ethnography.
Do we have a successor?
Provost Rosenthal told me that she has a volunteer. I do not know who it is. I do know one person who said that they were interested, but I don't know.
Well, I know somebody who's substituted for you a time or two. So yeah, that's wonderful. If she has a volunteer, that's the best of all possible worlds, is to have a volunteer. Oh, very good. Well, so another role of the faculty secretary, I believe, is coordinating the changes to the faculty handbook, or is that more the provost?
That's the chair of the executive committee.
Oh, okay.
That's the executive committee function.
Okay.
So,
But as faculty secretary, you serve on the executive?
No, the faculty secretary is separate.
Oh, okay, does not serve.
Obviously, there's record keeper. That's a person you would turn to
Yes.
make sure you've got the record straight.
But you're not on the executive committee.
It's not, that position is not ex officio on the executive committee. And I have been on the executive committee recently, in the last several years, and was chair of it until my term ended in December.
So that, okay, so you have also been a member and chair, I believe, certainly in recent years, of the grievance committee, which would, if you want to talk about that, because you said you told me that you were on that since its establishment. So
right.
You want to talk about?
I think that was 2006 is when we created the grievance committee, and well, two things. First of all, anything that has happened in the grievance committee is confidential, and secondly, there's very little that's happened in the grievance committee. So it's important that we have that institution available, and it has been used several occasions, but it's fortunately has not been something
Yes.
that we've turned to readily as a faculty.
Right. So it's just a set of protocols if there is a
Right.
grievance, and certain things can be grieved and certain things cannot be. But
Right.
if, under certain conditions, it would be a set of protocols.
Right.
And with your parliamentary procedure background and all of that, I'm sure you're a good person to make sure those steps are just followed in order. That's, yeah, things are fair. You also on the were on the professional conduct committee on the faculty. I'm sure most every committee at the college you've been on at some point or another.
The committee on the faculty was an interesting experience of 6 years on that, 2 terms. That's certainly a very time-intensive and very important committee because it's the college's tenure and promotion committee, as well as faculty policy committee. But the biggest work, of course, is the following people's progress through the probationary period towards tenure, and then promotions that come up usually from associate to full professor. Mostly it's quite gratifying. You get to learn what are all of these things that our wonderful faculty are doing. I mean, it's a lot of work, and we used to, when I was on the committee not that long ago, I mean a decade ago, have you served on the committee on the faculty?
No.
To read the files, you had to go into the provost's office, into the vault. And after I remarried, my new wife was wondering why I had to disappear sometimes well into the wee hours of the morning, even sometimes, into the vault
Yeah.
on campus. Now it's all digitized, and apparently that no longer exists, which is good. A very good thing.
I remember that because you would going through the tenure process to review your file.
Right.
You had to sign the folder that you looked at it and sit in the room and not leave, and all of the things. So I didn't know that process had changed, but I do remember that.
And it really is a vault. I mean, it has the crank lock.
Like at the bank.
Like
yeah.
at the bank, yeah. It's
Yeah.
meant to be a secure, college records are kept securely there.
Yeah. So that is great service to the college, the committee on the faculty. How about curriculum? Were you ever on any curriculum revision or curriculum
I was on the
committees?
curriculum review committee that created the curriculum, what we call Curriculum 21, which was an interesting experience.
So we've had 2 new curriculums since I've been here. We were in the midst of the new curriculum, I think they called it, that had the first year experience. Well, wouldn't say the midst of it. We were at the very beginning of it when I arrived in 2005. It was the first year that all freshmen were in a FYEC. And then, of course, now we have the Curriculum 21, which I think because of COVID started in 22.
It started in 21.
Oh, it did?
But
Okay.
it started online, and so
Oh, right.
it makes it somewhat difficult to assess the immediate impact of the change in curriculum because we also had an exogenous shock in the pandemic. So it's hard, and then followed by a smaller class entering in 22. So it's hard to, and I'm not looking at these data anymore, others I presume are, but the impact of the change is a little hard to determine given the combination of events as it was rolled out.
Right. Okay, well, outside of the college, you've also done a lot of service. You've been a leader in the Mid-Atlantic Council of Latin American Studies, which you mentioned earlier in the context of your of Alice Swagger presenting. Any thoughts there?
I didn't know when I was young and a new faculty member that I was so constant. I didn't know when I became faculty secretary that I would do it for 23 years. I didn't know when I went to my first Mockless conference in 1997. Again, my wife Christina at VCU was a Latin Americanist as well, so we went together to the conference, that we would both be sort of recognized as people who might want to give leadership positions to eventually, that I would end up going to every executive committee meeting for 20 years of the mock list and would serve as president for a term and then as treasurer for 10 years. And basically, at the treasurer of that organization is basically the person who keeps everything together. Because presidents come every year, but the treasurer serves consecutive terms for up to 10. So in 2018 was the last time I was on the executive committee, and have since am just a member. But I didn't realize I'd be doing that for 20 years.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, that's steadfastness. Congratulations. you are loyal. We're going to have to put loyalty as one of your...
Yeah. One-trick pony, or I don't know what to call it, but...
Well, you've been a very strong advocate for shared governance at the college and been very active as a member of the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors. And I see that you are wearing your lapel pin today,
Right.
which I appreciate. So talk about your role with the AAUP and the importance of that organization for Randolph-Macon faculty.
Yeah. Again, this is another sort of the same kind of story that it was my second or third year that the older faculty who had been members of the AAUP and sort of let their membership lapse or let their activity lapse, mostly men at that time, the men who had been at Randolph-Macon in 1974 when there was actually a union drive that I suspect Professor Scanlon has talked about in previous Macon Memories, because James was the one who wanted to revive the chapter, called for people who were members. I happened to have been a member, but I'd never had participated in a chapter. I'd never heard of it until I received my PhD, and one of the members of my committee said, now that you are a member of the professoriate, there's one thing you must do. You must join the AAUP. And I had to ask, what's that? And then immediately joined. So James and others, Greg Doherty, wanted to revive the chapter and asked amongst the handful of people that happened to be members if anybody would be willing to chair it. And I said, sure, I'll do it. And so I was president of the chapter and built it up somewhat in the early years, and then got active at the state level. Served as president of the Virginia Conference for a term, and then became quite active at the national level and served 5.5 years on the National Executive Committee, which is the leadership body, and lots of other different roles. So the history of AAUP at Randolph-Macon is quite interesting because of that effort at a union drive when it was still possible for liberal arts colleges, for private institutions to have a National Labor Relations Board recognized union. That's no longer possible after a Supreme Court decision in 1980. But that's very much a part of the history of the college, and that was the birth of the faculty handbook. It was the birth of shared governance as kind of what the administration was willing to give in order to avoid an actual union.
Wow. So before in 1974, when you said that was the birth of shared governance, I'm just curious, it just meant the administration just called the shots and faculty just did their thing?
My understanding is that there was a faculty meeting, but that administrators were present, administrators voted, that there was no text that said, as we have now in the faculty handbook, that said, that there are these areas of primary and joint responsibility. There's no place you could turn to say this is the role of faculty in the governance of this institution. So it was pretty much whatever the administration allowed to have happen. And I've never met Luther White. I was never on campus when he was president, but those who remember him as a rather authoritarian leader. And so that led to a conflict in the younger faculty. People like James Scanlon and Bruce Unger, who'd been hired and came out of graduate school in the late 60s, had a different sort of attitude of what a college should look like. Randolph-Macon was changing very rapidly at that time, from a very small, kind of sleepy, small town southern liberal arts college to one that was a national institution. So those ideas led to a union drive that fell short of unionization, but did achieve the creation of the handbook.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that was the beginning of the handbook. Well, that's very interesting. The only Making Memories interview that I can think of offhand that was with Tom Porter, where he specifically addresses the union, initiative which failed. I did also interview Luther White, and he alludes to it, but not in this any depth on that topic, which is not surprising. But so wow, well that is some wonderful history right there. Part of, I guess, as your role in the AAUP, you've also distributed our faculty's salary rankings with their peer institutions and different things every year. Talk about why that's important.
I will be very honest that the AAUP produces a salary report every year. When I was agreed to be the president, I was looking for things to raise the visibility of the AAUP. People are always interested in salary questions, so I thought I would put something together, compare us to the other Virginia Foundation of Independent College Schools. And again, that's something I didn't anticipate I would be doing every year from beginning in 1998. The first year I did that, I heard from what his title had been at the time, Associate Dean Bill Franz, challenging the validity of the peer group, which I certainly get. But I argued that it was
the FIC.
It's a consistent group of similar colleges, not entirely, because it includes Washington and Lee and University of Richmond, who have salaries that are in a different stratosphere than ours. So I mean, they're always 1 and 2, but that it wasn't going to change a lot. And that sort of, once it came out every year, I tried to always make the report very reasoned and not screaming about salaries, but to just point out where our weaknesses are. I think the most consistent ongoing weakness that report has shown is in gender equity. And that, it's always a little painful after I send that report out to hear back from faculty who are depressed once again at some of the patterns that are apparent in that report. I think they're apparent in other colleges' reports if they so share them. But mainly, I just wanted to raise the profile of AAUP. And I think that it did. Those data ultimately were shared by several different faculty representatives to the board, year in, year out. And I think that has made the board more cognizant of faculty concern about salary.
You do?
I'm pretty sure of it, yeah.
Good. Other AAUP initiatives, because I know there were, any other on campus that you want to highlight?
Well, other people have stepped up and are taking the leadership, and which is, the part of any good advocate is that when you step aside, that there are other people there to do it. And I think that's probably true with the campus AAUP.
Yeah, that you raised awareness enough and people have continue and okay, now if we've got a few minutes left, we can just talk about some broader history of the college reflections. One of the biggest watershed moments, I think, in the last 20 years was certainly COVID. COVID. Any thoughts? I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts.
Trying not to just focus on the details of March of 2020 and after that, I think that we have, as part of what was already happening technology-wise, that we now have a lot of expectations about use of technology that were evolving, and then they got pushed very rapidly forward. And I know that were I younger and planning to be in this business longer, that I would have to do a lot more work to become more savvy about using technology in the classroom, using technology to reach students. And of course, this is not a COVID thing, but the arrival of easily used artificial intelligence
yes.
is an opportunity, but I find it deeply concerning. But
Yeah.
again, I'm at the point in my career where I probably will not put much energy into trying to figure out how to redesign classes to accommodate the fact that it's so easy to use those technologies.
Yeah.
So higher education is changing very, very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose everybody at this point in their career feels that that's happening, even if they retired 40 years ago. But the political environment, the legal environment for higher education is changing very dramatically.
Mm-hmm. And the reputation, or well, that's maybe not the right word, but just the appreciation of higher education is sort of in a depression in our culture right now. So that's
right.
a challenge. But the technology issue, that's a very good point. Just the pivot to all technology all the time because of COVID. But it was interesting because before that, I think we were sort of on a cusp of deciding if we were going to be an online class kind of place or what the role of online learning was going to be. And then, of course, we had to go totally to that. But it seems like as we've recovered or getting back to the new normal, we haven't gone to the online learning model that we could have been pushed to.
Right. I think that's right. And through some of my positions on the executive committee during that period, I know there had been a technology committee of some sort, I forget its title, that had been looking at potential uses of online learning, and then that got pushed very rapidly, but so did a bunch of other things that were very difficult, the strategic resource allocation and other considerations about reforms to how we deal with programs on the college, academic programs. That all sort of pushed this back to the point where now the administration is less interested in ever hearing what that committee that I was on briefly was going to propose, because for one, the world has moved so far beyond where we were 2 years ago, and two, I think you're right that we've decided our niche in higher education is to be a residential campus, building new housing, parking.
All those good things, yeah. Well, just along those lines, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges facing the college today or in the next, you're big. I guess there's always a perennial need for money. Finding ways to generate more revenue, but other than that, what kind of
so
challenges?
certainly the cost model is really in trouble. There was a William and Mary professor here a few years ago talking about that if you want cheap dentistry, let's go back to dentists that we had in the 1950s. Interviewer makes face. No one would want that. That would be malpractice. If we tried to do higher education the way we did in the 1950s, that would be malpractice. But that means you have to invest in all kinds of technological infrastructure and other services that are now expected that were not even imagined when you and I went to college, and in my case in the 1970s, that it would be malpractice not to have those, and of course that drives the cost up. So what colleges are expected to do, what's demanded of them, are so much greater, but yet then the cost is borne less by the public sector. Pell Grants have not kept up with the increase in cost. State funding has, far from not keeping up, it has gone the other direction for the public institutions. So the costs are to a point that we don't have a good model that's truly bearable for a large number of the people we hope to serve. So that's a huge, huge challenge. It's either going to require more public money and a commitment that seems completely lacking right now for at least the way we do higher education. There might be that kind of money for a 2-year model or a 3-year model for creating certificates that make you job ready, but don't look like the liberal arts model that this college is built on. I think there are places for I think this college will survive very nicely. I think the liberal arts college will continue to exist, but some of our peers that we know and have interacted with for a long time may not be here in a generation.
Wow. Well, on a happier note, what have been some of your most satisfying experiences at Randolph-Macon?
The political science department has placed interns at the Virginia General Assembly. Our J-term is uniquely suited to internships for the Virginia calendar for the General Assembly meets in January, February, basically. The members of the Virginia General Assembly love our students because they're there full-time for 4 or more weeks, not competing with their other classes at their campus, wherever they might be studying. And so we have a lot of students there. I oversaw that program for a few years, but Professor Marr has taken that over and done admirably with it. I've also, again, AUP, we've organized an advocacy day for faculty every year since 2003. That we go to the Virginia General Assembly. So we have a lot of contact locally, politically. And when I'm at the General Assembly, I run into lots of Randolph-Macon students, alumni, who are now sometimes even there's a new delegate this year who was an international studies major and graduated in 2003.
Nice.
And went to visit her just as not a lobbying visit, but as just a congratulations on your career and being here. And I think I've run into several students who have told our current students who might happen to be with me that, I wasn't a real high GPA student, but Professor Turner taught me how to write.
Oh, that is satisfying.
And that's because I remember that student. It was a lot of work. But that people who are now doing things successfully that they enjoy and been doing them for a number of years can point to something specific that they learned in my classroom, and I'm sure they can do that for many other faculty members' classrooms.
I'm sure that's very gratifying.
In January, I was with a professor from University of Virginia who came away just totally wild with the Randolph-Macon political science program. He's asked, does Sabato do any of this? Referring to Larry Sabato.
Right.
I don't know, but I like the comparison. I like where you're going with the comparison. So
right.
The things we do well, we do very, very well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's gratifying. Very good to hear. Well, I want to thank you for coming to Making Memories today, and just let you have the last word if there are any other memories or stories that you'd like to share.
The first day I came to Randolph-Macon, had that interview with Bruce Unger. We did come over to the library, and of course the library still had the card catalog, the old-fashioned card catalog dominated the main floor here. So that's how far back I go here on this campus, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, that's a great memory, and thank you for sharing it as we're in the library recording this interview. So Professor Brian Turner, thank you so much for coming to Making Memories.
Thank you, Professor Wright, for having me.